Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Future of Scientific Conferencing workshop. This is the track focused on balancing participant needs and technology for engaging conferences and meetings. My name is Dr. Beth Jaworski. I am the Director of Participant Platforms within the All of Us Research Program at the National Institutes of Health. I am also a member of the Future of Scientific Conferencing Workshop Planning Committee. For those with visual impairments, I am a white woman with long light brown hair, blue eyes, and glasses. I will be moderating this session focused on virtual frontiers, transforming conference experiences with immersive technologies. In this session, we will hear a brief presentation from each speaker. After all of the presentations, we will engage in a group moderated discussion, including questions that are submitted by the audience. At any time during the session, you may use the Q&A function to submit your question for the speakers. You may also use the chat function to share your thoughts and engage in discussion. I am pleased to introduce the speakers in this session. We have a very exciting lineup today. For additional information about each speaker, you can access the speaker biography and headshots located in the LabRoots platform. I would first like to introduce Dr. Anna Queiroz, postdoctoral researcher in the Virtual Human Interaction Lab at Stanford University. Our second speaker will be Dr. Grace Ahn, Director of the Center for Advanced Computer-Human Ecosystems and Professor of Advertising and Public Relations in the Grady College of Journalism and Mass Communication at the University of Georgia. And our final speaker today will be Dr. Blair McIntyre, Head of Immersive Technology and Spatial Computing, Global Technology and Applied Research at JP Morgan Chase. So now I would like to turn things over to our first presentation from Dr. Anna Queiroz. Anna, thank you so much. We are looking forward to hearing your presentation.
Hi, Beth. Thank you so much. And thank you all for being here today. I hope my internet holds until the end of the session. So I'm a white woman, brown hair, brown eyes, and it's a pleasure to be here with you all today to talk about how we can use new technologies to help creating meaningful connections, especially targeting scientific conferences. So first, I'd like to bring a definition of what a computer-mediated communication is. And I like this definition from Dr. John December that highlights the purpose of why we would like to use computers to mediate our communication with others. And this purpose is focused on creating, exchanging, and perceiving information. And if we think about that and think about scientific conferencing, they share the same purposes. We want in conferences to create, to exchange, and to perceive information, and how we can use new media to enhance this communication and information exchange. So if we think about the tools that we can use to support computer-mediated communication for conferences, and if we analyze them according to how they allow us to have a real-time interaction, meaning like higher synchronization of communication, and also how it allows us to be immersed in that medium, we would have, as on our bottom left, with low real-time interaction and low immersion, like emails, social media posting, and online forums. If we think about less immersive technologies, but that allows real-time communication, we think about instant messaging, online chat, and video conferencing. Now, moving for more immersive, but it's still not in real time, we have the VR headset or join a VR world and review and watch a recording of a previous conference. Or if we think about more immersive and real-time communication, we have the collaborative VR platforms and also the VR conferencing and chat platforms as well. And if we think about how this changes communication across those media, in this diagonal, we can see that we enrich this media. So there is a theory called media richness theory that as we move through this diagonal, we can perceive this mediated communication as closer to what would be in-face an in-person communication. And then, so moving to immersive, to video conferencing studies, I've been focusing on trying to understand how this technology influences how we communicate with others. I'd like to share one of the studies we conducted with about 4,000 participants, where I was interested on how video conferencing influences how we feel connected to others during those conferences, and how it also influences our well-being in general. And what I found was that as we have small groups sessions and short sessions, participants reported higher feelings of connectedness with others. But as these meetings grow in number of participants or became longer, then participants started to report what we called Zoom fatigue and exhaustion related to those video conferences meetings, to the point that it had a negative effect on how they felt connected to others and how they felt well-being. And it's important to take that into consideration when we think about hybrid formats and think about the number of sessions and the length of the sessions in hybrid conference settings. Now moving to more immersive technologies, I've been working with virtual reality for the last years, and I'm not sure if the video will run for you, but here should be a video of someone using a VR headset and going through their experience about the ocean, where all the digital environment is refreshed according to her body movements, and she can interact with the digital content. And this digital content and the headset, they just block all her physical environment. This capability of the technology immerses our senses in the digital content and creates what we call the feeling of presence, meaning that after some minutes, participants feel the virtual environment as it was real, and even triggering physiological responses as it was real. And my first concern was, well, how will this environment support and enhance learning? And in media comparison studies, I found that comparing VR to watching the same content on a computer monitor or in printed materials, participants, after having the VR experience, they were more creative, answering open-ended questions. Also, they reported higher feeling of self-efficacy. That's how much they felt able to learn, confidence about their learning. And most interestingly, in a large scale study, I wanted to understand how movement would correlate with those variables. And I found that as more participants moved around during an interactive VR experience, more they reported self-efficacy, more confident in learning they were. But on the other hand, they recalled less about the experience they had. And the reason for that is that the learning assessment was based on information coming from the narration. So participants that were moving more, they were probably not paying that much attention to the narration. That impaired learning. So it's also important to think about the design and the tasks being executed in the VR environment. With that in mind, I also wanted to understand if in a social VR platform, being able to interact with others and with digital objects, how it would influence recall. And I found that participants that had the opportunity to collaborate in the virtual environment and manipulate 3D objects, they recalled more information about what they were learning than participants that did not have that opportunity. Another area that VR has been used and investigated a lot, and I've been conducting studies with thousands of middle and high school students, and also with residents from coastal areas that can be affected by sea level rise, is how we can use this technology to communicate about climate change. And what I've been finding is that this immersion of the senses through the technology has a positive impact on behavior change, meaning that participants were more willing to change their behavior to adapt to climate change, and that this change was mediated by risk perception, meaning that participants in VR, they perceive the risks of climate change as higher than participants using other media, and that had a positive effect on behavior. Also related to self-efficacy, I found through several studies this positive effect of immersion in self mechanism leading to that was because participants in VR, they felt more in control of their own learning, they felt more agency over their learning, and that had a positive effect on self-efficacy. And now translating all these findings and what we know through how we could support more engaging, interesting, and innovative scientific conference through these media. So to share a little bit about that, I want you all to recall this day, so March 15, 2020. That was the day of the COVID-19 lockdown. And back then I was working here at Stanford also in an initiative that connected the industry with academia. And we had several events scheduled in person on campus. As the lockdown came, we were thinking about how we could provide as engaging as in-person experiences, but mediated by technology. So we spent several months trying to first define how this VR conference would be, and to find a social VR platform that could allow us to customize the environment and bring to our attendees the experience we were planning. And during about 4 months, we had several demos from several companies that were mostly in beta version, because back in 2020, many of those social VR platforms were not ready yet. But then we found one, and then the next challenge was we needed this platform to work across different hardwares. So VR headsets, tablets, mobile phones, and computers. And computers could be run by Windows, like have an operational system in Windows or iOS. And well, difficult to find, but we could find this platform. And then the next step was training both presenters and attendees on how to use that VR platform. So we created an orientation guide shared with all attendees, all presenters, and we hosted training sessions in the virtual environment, in the platform, where we trained them on how to customize their avatars, how to navigate through the environment, how to interact with the objects in the environment, and also how to interact with others in the lecture hall. And finally, July 2020, we could launch the first event, the Very Virtual Retreat, and after that, several of them. So what have I been learning from that experience and the research I've been conducting that I would like to share with you? First, immersive experiences, VR experiences, they can provide a richer experience in hybrid conferences, and that can lead to higher engagement. And also that can foster new ways of collaboration to build new environments, especially when we are talking about workshops. And we have to take into consideration the audience individual needs. That's very important, mainly focusing on the technical infrastructure that they will have available to join the conference, and how we can support and help them to have take most benefit of these new and innovative conference methods. Thank you so much. Here is my contact information. If you have questions after Q&A or would like to share and discuss ideas, please reach out. And now I'm looking forward to Dr. Grace Ann talk and our discussion at the end. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. Introduce our next presenter, Dr. Grace Ann. And as a reminder, if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the Q&A, or if you would like to engage in any conversation with other attendees, please feel free to put your questions and thoughts in the group chat. Thank you so much. And Dr. Ann, I turn
Hi, lovely to be here. My name is Grace An, and today I wanted to talk a little bit about how we have been working at our University of Georgia Center to try to bridge these physical distances with a variety of different devices that all fall into the immersive technology category. Um, so let me go ahead and take it away. Anna just discussed a few issues with the challenge of mediated communication. And whenever we are doing almost exactly what we're doing here, so we're using different media technologies to try to mediate this level of communication and social interaction that needs to happen. There is a lot of perceptual information and social cues that are being lost as we try to communicate through different web cameras and computers. Although we are mostly able to see facial expressions and simple hand gestures, potentially, we're really not sharing the same space as we interact together. And that is relatively evident, particularly with video or web based conferences that we are now accustomed to. And social interaction is very rich, and still can be rich in mediated communication. And a lot of the prior communication work demonstrates that we need time in order to sort of make up for a lot of the perceptual cues that are being lost. So, as long as we have enough and sufficient time to get to know each other through these web interactions, we're fine. These video conferences can be even richer and even more rewarding in terms of the social cues as long as we have sufficient time. But typically, we just don't have that luxury, and so we are time constrained. And so, with limited time, the loss of perceptual cues and social interactional cues really can't be made up for. And so that really presents one of the largest and greatest challenge for trying to use these sorts of virtual platforms for these conferences. And using these virtual reality and immersive extended reality platforms allows us to really surround the users with multiple layers of digital cues to cover for the loss of perceptual loss or the perceptual information when we are using these video platforms. So we can see and hear and feel and move as if these events are happening at the moment. And so this is going to be as close to face-to-face interaction as we're going to get with current mediated communication devices. It also allows us to naturally map our gestures and interactions. So we can reach out, we can grab, we can shake hands, high five through embodied avatars. A lot of these virtual and immersive technologies have allowed solo users to do this. What we're really interested in as researchers is the fact that a lot of these immersive experiences are going from solo experiences to social experiences. So now we're allowing multiple users to embody avatars and to interact synchronously, very similar to the ways that we would be interacting in a face-to-face in-person conference. So it's multiple users that scale at tens of hundreds of users in the same virtual space, sharing that space together. Also, we're now able to provide what we call as asymmetrical interfaces. So depending on whatever device you have on hand, it may be smartphones or tablets or personal computers or virtual reality headsets. It really doesn't matter what device you have access to. We are able to meet in the same virtual space and interact with each other. So I wanted to quickly cover two case studies and using these sorts of virtual reality platforms to bridge physical distances and allow for multiple users to come together in these social interactions. The very first attempt that we try to use this sort of a immersive platform for bridging physical distances in the context of military families and how they deal with deployment. So over 2 million service members have had to go through multiple years of deployment, and that takes them away from family and interactions. And this poses a huge problem for not just the service members, but also the family members who are left behind. In particular, the parent and children interactions tend to suffer. If you're a parent, you've tried to communicate with your child from a long ways away, through either your phone or through video conferencing like Zoom, you will clearly understand the challenges of these missed or the lack of perceptual cues as you were interacting with your children. They really thrive on the shared experience of doing something together rather than just interacting in terms of giving and receiving information. And so we wanted to use virtual reality to try to see if we can get the service member to sustain their family rituals and routines in the immersive platform versus using just traditional communication tools like your phone or video conferencing. So prior to going into using the new technology, we wanted to see what the actual physical challenges were in their communication attempts while people were being deployed. And it turns out that generally, the families are trying their absolute best to stay positive. And during our semi-structured interviews with the family members and the service member who were deployed, we see that there are more positive words that they are using to try to describe their communication attempts. And so not everything is bad. They're trying their best to continue to communicate as a family and to keep their family traditions alive. And so a lot of the positive sentiments are being reflected in the interview process. And so what we find is interesting, though, is that they use far more I words. So I did this and I tried this rather than the we words like we did this and our experiences, again, potentially because of this lack of social interactions that happen together. It's rather I did this and that person did this rather than we did something as a group. And so that was one of the challenges that we experienced through our interview analyses. The pain points that were brought up by multiple interviewees were that the partners who are left at home are stressed and lonely. Children are experiencing behavioral issues both at home and at school. And they are really struggling to maintain the quality of communication. So they may be able to cover sort of that quantity and the frequency, but even so, they are struggling to maintain the quality of communication that they used to have as a face-to-face interaction versus trying to mediate the communication through these devices. And so the children felt like they were engaging in less meaningful conversations. A lot of the conversations they felt started to become monotonous. And so as they are communicating as family, typically, they'll ask, how was school? And the kids are kind of like, it was fine. It's good. I'm meeting friends. And so a lot of them felt like the communication was starting to become monotonous over time. And parents typically had low exposure to VR, which is relatively normal given that it's a newer device. And they were really concerned about the potential of addiction and safety issues. And so these are some of our takeaways as we interviewed military families. We introduced them to a proprietary immersive platform that we developed that allows families to come together in a virtual home. It's actually designed to look like a single family home. It has a nice little backyard with a playground area. The idea is that this is serving as a virtual home away from home. And they were able to gain access together as a family unit to these shared spaces to continue their family routines and rituals. For example, if they had, a Friday as family movie night, then they were able to do this within this virtual home. We conducted an 8-week field study and allowed the families to use this virtual reality platform as often as they needed. And then we asked them to write about and answer a few questions about their use of this VR space over the 8-week period. And the average session per family was at about 37 to 38 minutes as they interacted within this virtual reality platform. And over the 8 weeks, all families completed at least 2 to 5 entries, meaning that they had 2 to 5 sessions in the VR room together as a family. And just quickly going over their experiences, they all experienced high levels of shared reality. They had high levels of communication satisfaction, perceived cohesion as a family, and they experienced significantly lower anxiety as they went through the family communication together. And then our second attempt at furthering this use of this immersive experience of being together and interacting as a group is our IEEE VR 2020 conference that happened right as COVID started. And so this was when everybody was going into lockdown. And unfortunately, this was exactly the time that we had to launch a pretty large scale conference with virtual reality experts. So it's one of the most well-known VR conferences for academics and professionals who are interested in VR. And we were about to launch this in-person conference in March of 2020 in Atlanta. Turns out that we couldn't do this. And so we had to quickly pivot this conference from in-person to a virtual version relatively quickly, and decided to use another platform at that time called Mozilla Hubs, which allowed us to, again, provide asymmetrical interfaces. So a wide variety of devices that participants had on hand to enter into the same virtual space together for this conferencing. And we opened up a large number of rooms in this virtual conferencing arena in Mozilla Hubs so that we can allow people to have different divisions and tracks and sessions, much like the way that we are doing right now for this NIH conference. People could also join in and watch a live streaming of this event happening through Twitch, which is sort of like almost watching a live streaming on YouTube as people are interacting within the Mozilla Hubs space. They could also join in through Slack. So we had multiple Slack channels supporting this experience, or other web-based experiences like Slido or social media. So you really had a wide range of ways to join in the social interaction that was taking place during the conference, even if it wasn't exactly virtual reality or engaging in an embodied experience as avatars. So it was completely up to the attendees to pick their cup of tea. And what's really interesting is that this is a gathering of essentially the most expertise that you might have surrounding virtual reality and virtual reality technology. So these people mostly had headsets at home, multiple headsets and access to headsets at home. They had the experience and the expertise to use this. And so we were interested in whether they would be turning to virtual reality technology given their experience and expertise and the access to the devices at home. So over 60% of the attendees had a virtual reality headset at home, but it turns out that typically Twitch, the live streaming was the main platform that was used, and only a third of the attendees actually used their headsets. When we interviewed and surveyed the participants, a lot of them responded that the virtual reality or the virtual conference itself in their minds they thought of this as a fundamentally different, I guess it's a qualitatively different beast. And so they conceptualized this and had a different orientation toward virtual conferences than in-person conferences, which makes a lot of sense. For example, we're not traveling to a different location. We're not in a hotel. We're not locked in together. A lot of times we think of ways to balance our let's say, duties and responsibilities at home when we are entering the virtual conferencing space. And so in a lot of the attendees' minds, it's just not the same thing. And even when they know that they're getting a better quality communication experience with virtual reality, they're not going to be using that platform when they are attending to competing responsibilities in their physical space. But when the social presence and the social interaction is richer and is successful, you can see that some of the quotes from the attendees actually reflect very positively on their experiences within the virtual reality platform. So some people say, this experience was incredible. I was so impressed at how much it reflected the feeling of being at a conference in person. I loved the ability to check out of the corner of my eye what was happening in the other tracks and other divisions. And one person said it was easy to approach people that you wouldn't know. It feels less intimidating, for instance, easier to join conversations than in the physical presence, which is usually more difficult to get into that circle. And surprisingly, multiple attendees mentioned that when they go to in-person conferences, they really struggle to break into a conversation circle, particularly when they don't know the attendees already. And they mentioned that joining in conversations and with potentially lots of attendees already sort of floating around and struggling with figuring out that environment, the exploration that everybody is engaging in together really made it easier to strike up new conversations and get to know people. And we heard this particularly from the early career scholars and the much more junior scholars in the group as well. When we opened up this experience for attending the conference to the wider global audience, once we went into a virtual format, we saw almost an immediate jump and an immediate increase in the diversity of the attendees, and diversity meaning not just racial diversity, but also in the sense of geographical diversity. And a lot of the attendees in their post-attendance survey mentioned that they would not be able to, or they would not have been able to attend the conference for a variety of reasons that restricted their travel. So persons with disabilities, or if they had young children, they just could not travel. Some people chose not to travel for climate change reasons. And researchers with restricted resources, they just didn't have funding to travel. They were all able to participate in the virtual version of the conference. And so it had a pretty dramatic impact in terms of the diversity of attendees coming into the virtual conference. And we also saw a surge in non-academics who may be interested in the topic, but typically are not, or they don't find the in-person conferences in academic circles to be inviting. And so they actually hung around in the virtual version of the conference and had a lot of conversations during the IEEE VR 2020 conference in 2020. And we also experience a surge in the inclusivity in the networking experience. And so people experience lower barriers to engage in conversations. Student attendees had anecdotes of encounters with senior scholars that they would never have been able to engage in conversation in in-person conferences. Some of the quotes really highlight this experience. So they say it's easy to approach people, but you don't, or it's easy to approach people that you don't know. It feels less intimidating. And let's see, one of the quotes also said that it really levels the playing field and gives more opportunities to junior people or just enthusiastic people. And they were very surprised that there were so many industry researchers in an academic conference. Again, so you see that inclusivity and diversity in the amount and the number of attendees joining in for the conferencing experience. If we could do this again, so it's 2024, we have learned a few things along the way as we try to work with these social experiences in VR. These virtual conferences do need a different structure because, again, you are competing with constraints of your physical responsibilities and your physical space. And so we would recommend that the virtual versions of these conferences have shorter bursts of activities rather than let's try to block out 9 to 5 while you're at home. It just doesn't seem to be feasible for most of the attendees. So shorter bursts of activities. Mediated conferences do need more time. And so instead of doing like a 2 to 3 day conference, we may consider shifting with a more flex and maybe a more like hybrid version of the conference over a longer period of time. And we definitely need to consider asymmetrical interfaces because not everybody is going to have a virtual reality headset at home, nor are they willing to use their headset all the time. We do need to cover with the attendees a list of prerequisites. So they need to be in the mindset, secure a quiet room, dedicated time, go over a tech check before people join into this virtual conferencing platform that you're using. Training sessions for new technologies is going to be absolutely fundamental. I think people tend to not remember how we learned to use computers, but everybody had classes. We actually had a pretty steep learning curve in getting to use and to accommodate the usage of things like typing or how to use a mouse or how to save files. And so we actually had relatively a steep learning curve for computer literacy. We do need to have the same for virtual reality or any sort of immersive technology tools that we're going to try to incorporate into our tool set. And so that is it for me. And I am happy to toss it over to Beth.
Thank you so much, Dr. An, for that fantastic talk as well. This is really, really interesting. I think we're going to have a great conversation. But before that, I would like to turn things over to our final speaker in this session, Dr. Blair McIntyre. Blair, I turn it over to you. I think you may still be muted, Dr. McIntyre.
Muted, thank you.
We are not hearing your sound.
Thank you. Thank you. So I'm really happy to be here. For those with vision impairments, I'm an older white man with gray hair and glasses. And today I want to talk about hybrid conferences and things around them in particular. So as was mentioned, I'm currently head of immersive technology research at JP Morgan. I am actually also a professor. I'm currently on leave from Northeastern University. And before that, I was a professor for 23 years at Georgia Tech and also worked at Mozilla, and that's relevant to some of the projects that I'm mentioning. I do want to say that any of the opinions expressed here are my own and not those of JP Morgan. So some people may be thinking, why is a banker here? What are you doing for research? So JP Morgan has a research group, Global Technology Applied Research, that does scientific and academic style research with the goal of understanding how new technologies, non-traditional technologies can impact the company and benefit our business and our customers. And so we work across a wide variety of technologies. Our largest efforts are in quantum computing, quantum communications, but we touch on a bunch of the other technologies, including immersive technology, which is what I lead. The easiest way to think about what a company like this would care about is to not think about us as a bank, but think about us as a large enterprise. So JP Morgan has about 300,000 employees worldwide in about 100 different countries around the world. And so we think about any of the enterprise applications you might care about. In the immersive work and collaboration space, one of the projects that I'm particularly interested in is how we support distributed work, distributed conferences, distributed meetings. And in particular, I am interested in the idea of hybrid conferences. So the previous two presenters talked, as did other people here at the conference, talked about remote conferences. People have talked about multi-site conferences. When I talk about hybrid conferences, I'm thinking in particular about events where we have the traditional physical on-site conference at one or more sites, but also have online attendees. This usually manifests itself and has post-pandemic as conferences that have an event and they stream the videos, for example, on Zoom or Twitch or something like that. And those events can share the technical content of the conference, but they don't actually give remote attendees what is often viewed as the most important or one of the most important reasons for attending an event, which is the opportunity for networking, for making new connections, for having the kind of experiences that require interactions. And this is the kind of stuff that the previous two presenters talked about as well. In the context of a company event, such as what happened at JP Morgan, we also have sort of a slightly different context, which I'm really interested in how we can leverage. As academics, we often go to conferences, and we often go to many a year. And in contrast, people who are at companies may only get to go to these events rarely, and they're seen often as a perk or an honor to be able to be chosen to attend, say, an event, as opposed to doing your normal day-to-day work. And so the employees are very enthusiastic and very anxious to take advantage of it fully in a way that, say, us academics don't always do. So I just want to touch on a few experiences that I've been involved with over the last, since 2018, 2019. To highlight some of the reasons why I'm so interested in us creating better ways of supporting hybrid events. So prior to the conference Grace mentioned, VR 2020, I ran a small hybrid event at the ACM User Interface Software and Technology Conference. Like many of our current conferences, they already had planned to stream the talks on, I believe they were using Twitch at the time. And so what we wanted to do, at the time I was working at Mozilla, I was in emerging technologies, and we created this platform called Hubs. And I wanted to see if we used a social VR platform to stream talks and to create experiences for remote attendees to interact with each other, what sort of experience would that create? And could we recreate some of the networking benefits of a traditional conference? And so we streamed talks, and you can see an image of it here. We also created a few social events and created an online poster event where we recruited people who were co-authors of the conference posters. And then during the same time as the physical conference poster sessions, we had them present in the virtual space to virtual attendees. And echoing some of what Grace said, this one-on-one interaction was very favorably received. People really felt like they were getting a similar experience. They had the opportunity to talk, and they really used the spatial aspects of VR to be able to look around, see where other people were, have side conversations, and so on. And so it really did capture some of what we think is the value of attending, right? And so that was very encouraging. And we did this in preparation to IEEE Virtual Reality 2020. So as Grace said, this was right at the beginning of the pandemic. I was one of the co-chairs, and we'd planned to do sort of a larger version of what we did at WIS. We wanted to have experiences for remote attendees where they could see not just the one conference track, but all three of them via Twitch. We wanted to have a variety of rooms in the space where they could experience posters and have some social experiences. And as you know, based on Grace's talk, that and as your own experience, that sort of went sideways, right? So a few weeks before the conference, we decided to take it all online. One of the reasons we were able to do it is because we were already planning on having this experience anyway. So we flipped it around. We still were streaming all the talks into over a variety of rooms. And we, as Grace mentioned, pulled in a lot of other technologies to create experiences like using Slack, using Slido, and so on. We created almost 1,000 rooms in the virtual world to support the anticipated number of attendees, and created actually a new venue that VR had never had, a Birds of a Feather experience, just so we could take advantage of these spaces. There's some interesting side effects of this. One, at the end, we computed the cost, and the cost of running this entire online event was less than just the AV cost of running the on-site event, which I thought was really interesting. We also needed a lot more volunteers and staff than we needed at the physical event because of all the unfamiliarity, right? The training that one of the speakers mentioned, the need to help people and lead them through and so on. But the event was very successful, and Grace highlighted a lot of the reasons it was. But this was still an online only experience. When I think of hybrid events now and going back to where we started at WIST, if you look at a normal conference schedule, a lot of what you see in these colored boxes here are speaker sessions, right? They're panels, they're papers, and so on. But if we highlight here in red all of the parts where people are kind of walking around, not sitting and listening, we've got huge spaces where physical on-site attendees are getting networking and social experiences that the remote attendees typically do not get. And so we're really interested in how we can leverage those spaces to create experiences for remote participants to network, but also, I think, potentially at least as importantly, for the remote and on-site attendees to connect, right? So this is one of the things that we're working on at the company right now. Last year at one of our internal developer conferences, so there's a very small URL here that you could go read a little bit about the conference, a conference called DevUp, which allows technologists at the company to come together to, as they say, learn, which is what you think about, but mostly to share with each other, to network, to connect with each other. And at a company like this, and this is not particular to ours, with so many people, so I said JP Morgan has 300,000 employees, about 60,000 of them are technologists, which makes us one of the bigger technology companies. Spread around the world, there's a lot of lost opportunity for people to learn from each other if they're on opposite sides of the globe, not really bumping into each other from day to day. And a conference that we could run in a physical space has to be small, right? So DevUp has been about 500 people. And we're really interested in how you can scale this up. And this really, for similar reasons that as academics, we want to scale up events like this. So what we did is a small experiment last year, and we're working on another larger experiment this year, is to, we basically created a virtual world that mapped to the physical space. So they were physically similar. And we created a set of activities, photo sharing, a kind of scavenger hunt, speed networking, and another event at the end that were aimed at connecting remote people with on-site people and giving them opportunities to connect and network. And we ran multiple sessions throughout the conference to give people an opportunity to try it out. And this is what one of them looked like. So the scavenger hunt speed networking, imagine you're in a virtual space, if you're a remote attendee, that is laid out exactly the same as the physical space, hallways, rooms, and so on. And you're paired up with somebody in the physical space who's near where you are in that space. So if I'm a virtual attendee, I see a little avatar representing where that person is in the actual physical space and vice versa. There's balloons floating around the space, but only the physical attendee can actually see them at more than a few feet. So they have to work together to get the virtual person near them. They pop a balloon, it gives them a little speed networking, speed dating kind of question, and they have a conversation. And then they do it again with someone else. And so we did this and then interviewed and surveyed the people who had this experience. And the results were very positive. People in particular felt like they, as they said, were sharing the same space. They felt like they were together with that person. And the remote attendees felt like they had a sense of what the physical space would be like because we'd made it look that way. Many of the people who experienced this did make connections, which they followed up on after the event. So we were very had a very positive outcome from this, and we're looking forward to expanding on it in the future. So I want to close by just saying, I don't think physical in-person conferences in general are going away. All virtual events are great for doing webinars, for doing kind of talks and sharing at a certain way. I don't know if any others have had this experience. When I did the WIST 2019 demo, I actually had a senior attendee basically yell at me, telling me how I was going to destroy the conference by making it possible for people to attend without actually coming, which would ruin it for everybody. So there are people out there who really value in-person events, and there is value to them. The big thing that I think we need to do more work on is figuring out how to give the advantages of in-person events, the networking, the social activities where you build friendships and bond, into the virtual events, and in particular, enabling the people who go to the events physically to connect with the virtual attendees, because there's often an imbalance between those two communities, right? Senior members, people with more who come from richer universities, will be able to attend more conferences. As we saw with VR, as Grace mentioned, a lot of people from the Global South attended VR who had never attended VR before. A lot of students, a lot of professionals who couldn't justify traveling attended these events, and giving them the opportunity to network with each other, I think, is incredibly important if we're going to increase the diversity in our communities and equity in our communities. So I will end with that.
Fantastic, Dr. McIntyre. Thank you so much for another excellent talk. I would like to thank all of our speakers for their excellent and thought-provoking presentations. I would now like to move into the moderated discussion. As a reminder to our audience, you may use the Q&A function to submit your questions for the speakers. Your submitted questions will be visible to the moderators and speakers, but not to the rest of the audience. And I would also like to invite all of the panelists to come back to turn on their cameras. We have, I think, is a great question, and I think it dovetails with a question I actually wanted to ask each of you on the panel. So I'm going to combine the question from Q&A with a slightly broader question that I was hoping to ask. So the question in Q&A is that that you mentioned VR haptics technology. Haptics being where people can feel and move objects. What is the state of the art for that technology now? And how do you imagine such technology helping create a better virtual conference experience? And if I can build on that question just a bit, one of the questions I had really been hoping to ask this incredibly talented panel is, where do you think the field of immersive tech for scientific conferencing is going, and where should it be going? So including haptics in that. And so what are some of the new trends or areas of science that you're most excited about? Would love to hear from each of you if you're willing.
Okay, I can start. So I see this future very related to how the hardware is right now. So as we can see, like the hardware related to VR is evolving very quickly. And as it becomes lighter, more user-friendly, then people are going to be using that more often at home as they use their mobile phones or their computers. Then I can see this increase in adoption of the technology. So as Grace mentioned, like although 60%, I guess, of their attendees had VR headsets, just a fraction of them use them. So I think as we have this development related to hardware, to how user-friendly the technology is, then we are going to see an increase in adoption for scientific conferencing. And I also see that as a movement related to still using video conferencing, as Blair mentioned, having these hybrid environments where you can connect with the participants attending the conference in person. That's super important. So you can really have this bridged connection among all of them.
Yeah, I agree. Specifically related to the state of the art of the haptic technology available, it's better than not having haptics in the way that we are using video and web-based conferencing right now. Typically, you'll see in the consumer grade technologies like a little controller like this yay big. And it'll allow you to manipulate objects very similarly in the way that you are used to using a mouse for computer input. But the biggest challenge that a lot of these technologies are facing is the way that we are used to interacting in the physical world hasn't necessarily been completely mapped into the virtual world just yet. So our expectations are often shattered when we enter these virtual environments. For example, when we touch or lift an object, we expect some level of what is it? Sort of friction or pushback weight of an object. A lot of the things that we are used to and have expectations built on. So we have mental scripts of how the environment is supposed to work. That hasn't been completely replicated in virtual reality. And so initially going in, you'll experience I guess a sense of awe in how realistic it is. The further you continue to explore, you'll see these different almost chasms of your current expectations of how the physical world functions and the differences that you observe as you go into these virtual worlds. Over time, I think we'll continue to experience advancements. Are we there in terms of how mass media and movies tend to portray virtual worlds like Ready Player One? Not quite yet. So we're going to have to figure out these activities very similar to how Blair described the differences between physical and virtual conferences and learn how to work around them and accommodate the I guess the gaps in expectation and reality that we're going to have to deal with.
So I think what things like haptics offer is simply a way of making a better interface, right? An experience that feels more natural. I would like to reflect or to comment on sort of the usage of, say, VR headsets in hubs, like Grace had talked about, as an example of this. So at Mozilla, when we hubs was running for a long time. They actually are either in the process of shutting down or it was shut down recently. I can't remember when it's ending. And while it was originally designed for VR devices and AR devices in mind, something like 98% of people who visit a hubs room use the desktop. And a tiny percentage, so use non-VR. So a tiny percentage use tablets and phones. an extremely small percentage of it use actual VR devices, even though most of the people who built it and are using it were early enthusiasts who had these devices, as Grace said. And I think a lot of that had to do with friction. And not just the friction of, oh, I got to put it on and I got to run the thing and I got to connect to the thing and I got to do this and that. It's also the friction of not being able to do all the other things you want to do at the same time. So when people attended VR, and many of you are probably doing this right now. I mean, if I could ask people to hold up their hands and be like, how many people have their email window open and have looked at an email during this panel session, right? How many people have gone and looked up one of our web pages? How many people have gone and tried to download a paper or something, Googled something based on what we said? The current environments that we have to do VR conferencing don't let you do any of that, right? And I think with the devices that are coming out now, and the focus on ecosystems, right, on being able to use all your apps while you're in an environment, whether it's Microsoft and Meta announced that they're going to allow you to run Windows apps inside of Quest, and Apple lets you run iPad apps inside of the Vision Pro, and I think this will continue, right? Other devices have allowed you to bring in at least your phone or a tablet. I think when I step back and look at this, it's like what you really want is for each part of the conference, you want a different piece, a different type of media, right? Sitting and watching a video presentation like we're doing right now, or like you're doing right now, is fine in a little square box on your desktop, right? But when you're at that moment where you want to actually have a social experience where there's 10, 15, 20 people who are at a poster session or who want to gather and have a conversation after this thing, the little square box on your screen falls apart, right? You can't have a multi-person conversation in Zoom. And so I think where I see it going is that we'll just move from device to device. I'll be on my desktop and then I'll pick up my headset and I'll put it on, and then I'll take my headset off, and I might walk around and do my laundry with the headset on, and I might go out and feed my dog or go for a walk while attending a thing, right? And so it's that heterogeneous mix of technology that I see us getting toward actually relatively soon. We just need to develop the infrastructure for these conferences that enables people to consume different parts of it on the most appropriate device for that part.
Thank you so much. And I actually think that is a great segue into another question I would like to pose to each of you, as you would like to answer, is really thinking about the challenges to implementing. So I think that there are a number of challenges that you each highlighted that I think I would appreciate the opportunity to dig into a little bit more, because I think we have, this is a pretty, I would say, relatively tech savvy panel here, is certainly perhaps more tech savvy than average. Grace, I know you mentioned digital literacy or computer literacy. I think that's a piece of it. But I'm wondering if you might be able to reflect on some of the greatest challenges to implementing immersive tech for scientific workshops, conferencing, these types of events. And I'm thinking of some of the individual level challenges that I know a few folks touched on, the importance, for example, of customization, and how important that is, how expensive that might be to have really highly customized, avatars, or even like, for example, a home environment. Grace, so I was thinking of when you were talking about the military family studies, and you have sort of a generic single family home versus the ability to really customize it and make it feel like the home that you actually have. So there's some sort of the individual level challenges, but also some of the perhaps contextual or structural level challenges. So training, and I know I think a number of you touched on cost, for example. So I'm wondering if each of you might be willing to reflect on a key challenge or two, and think about some of the ways in which that you think that could be overcome to be able to actually effectively and successfully use immersive tech. I don't know if there's anyone that would.
Okay, so I can I can start and
Thank you, Anna.
follow the sequence we had. So you're welcome. Yeah. So for in our case here to have the event with these executive groups that are visiting Stanford frequently, we had them all over the world, and in different time zones. So of course, if they were here, they would all be aligned, but they were not. So it was very hard to find, time. So as Grace mentioned, like we had to have weeks of training sessions to make sure all the attendees were very familiar with the environment. And the environment we chose was also very difficult to find because we wanted an environment that allowed participants to customize their avatars, that we could place posters, that we could have video conferences, that we could place objects in general in the environment, and that environment to be something similar to what we would have, but better than what would be an in-person gathering. So also having the breakout rooms. So one example, we wanted the sound to not be all at the same. And, now it seems easy to find a platform like that 4 years later, but 2020, it was very difficult. So we wanted participants to have the privacy of their avatars were close. Some people that were not that close to them would not listen to the audio. So they could have, like, just as in person meetings, this opportunity to networking. So if I could highlight what were the most challenges, one was finding a VR platform that would attend to all these specific needs in terms of hardware and software as well. We had participants in countries where they could not join certain platforms, so we also had to think about that in terms of some restrictions in some countries, and having a lot of training sessions. So when Blair was mentioning like having more volunteers for the VR version of IEEE VR, it makes a lot of sense, and it's aligned with what we had here. We had to have those sessions, and of course we didn't have volunteers to help them, but we had to plan ahead for several weeks to host those training sessions. So those are key aspects that we faced here, and the way to overcome was just giving more time for the training, really searching. We had almost 4 months to search for platforms, and testing, a lot of testing. Like we hosted several sessions in the VR environment before we launched the event.
Thank you. That is really incredibly helpful.
Yeah, and to build on that, I think the initial discussions on how a lot of these devices do tend to miss out on the perceptual cues, and even with chat interfaces, we find that people make very strong bonds without the same level of perceptual cues in terms of communication quality. They just need more time to do so. And so in in terms of thinking about converting to these virtual conferences, is everybody going to eventually be using VR headsets? I just don't think so, at least for the next 5 or 10 years. I just don't think that everybody is going to be in VR constantly for conferencing. I think we do have to pivot in terms of how we conceptualize conferences. So the reason why the in-person conferences are so effective in the way that they are is that we completely block out 3 to 4 days. And that's, if you think about the amount of social interactions and social information that is being exchanged in very highly dense format, that's just a ton of social information. So conceptualizing, taking that amount of social information and chopping it into little bits, maybe not across 2 or 3 blocked days, but perhaps even 2 to 3 months. We've had a very similar take on how to spread this out in a recent conference that we had hosted, where we took the attendees and prior to leading up to the conference, we had them meet in VR. We also had a Discord channel open so that they can communicate via text. So spreading out the same amount of social interaction, the social information across a longer amount of time may be a more practical and feasible approach, because at the end of the day, you're talking about how much social information is being exchanged in between the attendees when we don't have access to the same amount of time or condensed time. And so it's almost, to me, maybe an issue of formula of how we plan out these events of interacting socially across different devices.
Yeah, I think to go to your question about the challenges of building, I mean, a lot of the problems we faced in the earlier systems that Grace and I talked about with VR and so on had to do with the software, the infrastructure, right? Hubs rooms couldn't really support more than 15 to 20 people. And if you were wearing VR headsets, like the Quest 1 was new at the time, and you had more than 10 people in the room, it just fell over. And that was just a function of the platform and the software architectures and so on. And so I think a lot of that, as Anna said, has gotten better and has enabled us to do more. So being able to get more people in spaces and so on. I think that as the technology gets better and the software infrastructure gets better, some things will get easier. But a lot of the really nitty gritty stuff that you need to do for these virtual events in a novel technology that's been highlighted in this panel. So having the tutorial rooms, having ways of people learning and understanding how these things work, and then learning and understanding, how far does my voice carry in the environment, things like that. Just it's such a different media if you're not used to it, that it just takes a long time to get comfortable in it. And so building that into the schedule, I think, is super important.
Thank you. Yeah, I think this is all lots of good, thought-provoking discussion points and things, I think, for everyone to reflect on. I see that we have one more a question that came in the Q&A. And I think it touches a bit on the digital literacy, computer literacy question a bit. But what do you think about the 2D spatial conferencing platforms like GatherTown and Spatial Chat, and how would you compare them to VR in terms of affordances and cost benefit on the pain points of implementing with folks who may not be tech first adopters, they may not be the early adopters, and sort of where might those platforms fit in?
So since I went last, I'll jump in first this time. I think I tend to think of those as somewhere between Zoom and VR, right? So you get some of the spatial benefits. I can see that there's 5 people over there. I can see that there's 20 people over there. I can see a name above a head, so I can go and talk to them in a way that you can't if you're using, say, Slack, right? So it does get some of the benefits of ad hoc and serendipitous connections. The actual communication when a group are talking is a little bit between VR and Zoom, right? But it still feels very Zoom-like. So having large conversations is harder than you would. And having the content in this space is harder just because of the sort of limitation of being in this top-down 2D thing. But I think, going back to my previous comment about using something like that to facilitate these ad hoc and serendipitous social interactions, maybe doing things like poster sessions and so on, where you want people to sort of discover each other and make new things. They give you a lot of the benefits, but they lose out on some of the finer cues of interaction. So I'll give one example in VR. Grace touched on this in the last question. If I am having a conversation, say the four of us are in a VR space, and we're using many platforms right now which don't have face, eye, mouth tracking, right? So our avatars look like what they're looking like, but you're not seeing a smile or who I'm looking at or anything like that. You lose a lot. But if you're talking with people you know in these environments, you actually start picking some of that stuff up. So if Grace and I are having a chat, and I know her very well, and she laughs in a certain way, or tilts her head in a certain way, or moves her hands, which are tracked in a certain way, I, in my mind, start inferring back her. And I've had this experience with a colleague of mine in Australia when we would meet in VR. But if I don't know you at all, then it's just a blob of bits, and I don't know how to infer filling that in. And so something like a GatherTown or a spatial chat, where you're basically throw all that out and just use video, you get those communication channels that you don't get with avatars.
Yeah, and to add a little bit more on that, we have had several attempts at doing video conferencing and virtual conferencing in GatherTown, and you might think that people adjust more quickly to a 2D spatial audio space, but oftentimes when we do the training, the 2D spaces are not able to map out how spatial audio works in that fine-grained sense that VR is able to map it out. For example, when I walk closer to the origin of a certain audio sound, I expect it to get larger. But when I'm moving my little avatar on a grid, a lot of people find it jarring. They moved one square space over, and now they're no longer within that that spatial audio circle, and then you can't hear the person you are talking to. And so, when we do these virtual conferencing trainings, surprisingly, people find it a little bit more intuitive to understand spatial audio in VR spaces than in these 2D spread out grid-like spaces. Some people will make the argument that people have more access to laptops or personal computers, and therefore using a web browser-based space like GatherTown is easier. But we do have PC VR where you don't necessarily have to have a VR headset. You can access it directly from a web browser. And so that can be a solution as well. I think eventually these 2D spaces will continue to die out as the immersive technology gets better and faster and just easier to use. It may be a case for, you know, what do people tend to pick up a little bit more intuitively and find easier to use? Although right now the web browsers provide more access, I don't know that it's necessarily more effective and more intuitive than these immersive spaces.
I agree. And what I can see is that, as you know, the immersive spaces, they get easier to be accessible, like to be accessed. As, for example, 2020, it was so just a few platforms that would work on a computer. And even though you had to download, you know, a piece of executable to run on your computer, now we already have, you know, a VR running from the browser. And as it gets lighter and lighter, it's going to be easier for users to join that environment and have the benefit of, you know, the visual, the 3D audio specialization that we have in immersive environments, joining from their computer. So I see that this path will just take some years for users to get used and for this technology to be easier processed on computers and browsers.
Well, I know that I personally have a long list of questions that I would love to ask, but we are at time. I want to thank all of our speakers for an excellent, really excellent panel session today. It was fascinating to hear everything, and I would like to thank the audience for submitting engaging questions and participating in the conversation as well. This concludes our panel session on virtual frontiers, transforming conference experiences with immersive technologies. I would again like to thank you for joining this session, and I would welcome you to join us at 4 p.m. Eastern for the workshop day 2 summary and closing session. That will be, I'm sorry, I think that is not the right, I'm realizing now that may not be the right time, that I believe the closing session starts at 4:30 p.m. Eastern time. So thank you so much for being here today, to the panelists and to the attendees. We really appreciate your time and attention. Thank you so much.